Okay, well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for attending tonight's EAP meeting. I'll start with apologies for absence.
None received so far, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And item 2 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of August 2021. Can I sign them as a true and accurate record?
Yep, agreed.
Thank you very much for that. And item 3 is members' declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations? No, that's perfect. Thank you. Okay, so item 4 is the school effectiveness update. So I'd like to ask Joe Hutchinson, the school effectiveness leader for the North, to present our report, please.
Good evening.
Good evening, Joe.
So my name is Joe Hutchinson and I'm Head of School Effectiveness in the North, and I'm going to talk through with you this evening a bit more about the role of the school effectiveness team, the schools that we work with and the schools across the North, and give you a bit more information about all of those things. Next slide, please. So you can see there on the table in front of you all the different types of schools that we have in the North and where they sit in terms of the 4 localities. We do have a bigger number of academies in the North than we do LA maintained schools, and we still have 1 secondary school that remains an LA maintained school. But all of our other secondary schools are academies. Thank you. Next slide. So I've just given you an overview there of the Ofsted judgments at the moment. So national versus North, and that's how they stand at the moment. You can see that from that slide, there are the national figures of the percentage of schools that are outstanding, good, RI or inadequate. And nationally, LA maintained primary and secondary schools are performing better in terms of their Ofsted judgments than academy primary and secondary schools. In North Hants, primary LA maintained primary schools are performing similarly to primary academies in terms of their Ofsted judgments. And of course, we want our schools to be at least in line with or above the national average for good and outstanding. And we want them to be below the national averages for requires improvement or inadequate. And it's important to note the following things with regard to Ofsted inspections. Outstanding schools have previously been exempt from inspection, but from this September, the 1st, they will of course be inspected again by Ofsted. Section 8 and Section 5 inspections were not undertaken by Ofsted between March 2020 and April 2021 because of the pandemic. This means that in that period of time, no inspection gradings of local authority schools or academies changed during that time. The difference between a Section 8 and a Section 5 inspection is Ofsted does not give graded judgments on a Section 8 inspection of a school, but if they find some evidence that the school would now be better than good, or conversely that standards may have declined, they will conduct what's called a full inspection with graded judgments, and that is called a Section 5 inspection. And if a school has been graded previously as requires improvement or inadequate, then when Ofsted inspect, they will do a Section 5 inspection on those schools. And that is a full inspection where they might be able to change the graded judgments. It's also worth bearing in mind that all of our heads have worked incredibly hard during the height of the COVID pandemic through what some of them have called the most challenging times in their career. And they've been, during this time, safeguarding pupils, safeguarding staff, working closely in partnerships, supporting their local communities in often creative ways. And our head teachers continue to work tirelessly to operate more fully in a business as usual way, whilst living alongside COVID and dealing with the continued very real issues that are still being presented. So with this in mind, as a school effectiveness team, we are making a real point this term of visiting all of our LA maintained schools to offer support, but also to ensure that schools are enabling the move back to business as usual and focusing very carefully on their curriculum provision and the quality of education moving forward. Inspections resumed from May 2021 and are now in full swing. And as a result of the pandemic, Ofsted has said to schools that they can expect their next inspection date to be extended by up to 6 terms. So what they've done is taken into account the period of time where the pandemic was at its height and are now going to be progressing through those inspections that they would have potentially carried out in that time. So what we're saying as a school effectiveness team to our schools is that we want them to be as prepared as possible for their next inspection visit, which could be slightly delayed, but also the window is open for some of those schools. Thank you. Next slide, please. This slide just gives you a feel for where our local authority primary schools are performing in terms of good or outstanding, and where our primary academies are performing in terms of good or outstanding. Unfortunately, in the north, those are less than the national averages at the moment, but obviously we're working towards that as we move forward. And we know that Ofsted will be visiting some of those schools in the very near future. You also need to be aware that currently we've got 30 schools, both academies and LA maintained, that are currently requires improvement. And this, for some schools, is a requires improvement judgment, which is more than a year old. And as I've said at the bottom there, these have some of them have had that judgment for more than a year or so. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. So for those schools that have had a requires improvement judgment more than once, we call those schools stuck schools, and the aim of our school effectiveness team is to look at ways in which we can support those schools to move from RI to good or better. And I'm just going to talk through a couple of things that we've introduced very recently to enable that to happen. So we have school improvement partners, and there's a range in skill set across the team so that we can make sure we cater for all of the different levels of education. So we have school improvement partners for early years, school improvement partners with a specialism in secondary schools, of course in our primary schools, and we also have a school improvement partner who's responsible for governance, because governance comes under, of course, the leadership and management element of running a school. We also have recently introduced in January 2021 an associate head teacher to our team, and I believe that that is a vital addition to the team, the role of the associate head teacher, in a number of ways. So the associate head teacher is in place and to lead and facilitate school improvement in schools causing concern, and or to provide additional support with individual settings to facilitate rapid improvement, or to undertake the duties of a head teacher where a school may be experiencing leadership issues. And also we've got an associate head teacher because sometimes schools are in a difficult position where, for example, their head teacher is on long-term sick leave and they haven't got somebody to step up into the role. So our associate head teacher can step in to undertake those duties to ensure that the school still has strong leadership in place. But the role of the associate head teacher is slightly different from our school improvement partners, because they can go and do bespoke work with the leadership team in a school and really strengthen that where we believe that there might be some areas for improvement. We've also introduced something called the Targeted Improvement Group, called a TIG, and this is something, a layer that we've put in place to work with our schools that we might be a little bit concerned about, or they may be slightly slipping and we think they're at risk of perhaps dropping down in one of their Ofsted categories. And this is where we put a team around the school. In that team will most likely be the associate head teacher, one of our school improvement partners, and it may be also that we've got some other partners that we're working with to strengthen that school. And this is for a set period of time where we would be working with the school over a period of 18 weeks, and we would have meetings in between to look at the progress that's being made towards particular actions or targets that we've set. And also we've put into place a strategy from September 2021, within which, and it is a broad strategy, and I'll talk more about that later on in the presentation, we will be looking at categorising schools so that we can have those conversations about where they are at a particular moment in time with their school allocated school improvement partner, and that will be for local authority schools. Next slide, please. Thank you. So where I talked about our stuck schools, or schools that have been RI more than once, we've got an example there of some schools that we've been working with, and the model that I just explained to you, where we've had an associate head teacher working with the leadership team on a bespoke but very, very regular capacity. I'm pleased to say that for those 3 schools, they very recently had what is called a monitoring inspection. And a monitoring inspection because they have been requires improvement for some time. So it wasn't a Section 5 inspection where they could change the outcome, but the inspectors, the HMI, were going in to check whether or not the school were actually making progress towards becoming good at their next inspection. And at each of those 3 schools, as you will see at the bottom of this slide, Ofsted deemed that leaders and those responsible for governors were taking effective action in order for those schools to become good schools at their next inspection. Now, we realise that that next inspection might be a little while in coming because of the delay due to the pandemic, but it's very pleasing to know that the actions that we've put in place as a school effectiveness team are beginning to have the desired effects. And hopefully with that pace of progress going on in those schools, they will become good at their next inspection. Thank you. We're also working with schools that may have been graded as requires improvement at their most recent past inspection. And so again, we have used the model where we've used the TIG process to work with those schools. We've also worked with other partners, for example, national leaders of education, and sometimes we broker those colleagues into our schools to do a piece of time measured work, and then we look at the impact of the actions at the end of those sessions. Or alternatively, our school improvement partners will be in those schools providing intensive support. So they'll use quite a large capacity of their time and regular visits in order to move those schools forward. And those particular schools that we've been working with are now due to be inspected, and they're within their inspection window. However, as I've just explained, that extension of about 6 terms or 1 academic year could also be the case here. So we might have a little bit of time to wait, but we're getting them Ofsted ready as we speak. Thank you. There are some schools that we work with, and as part of having school improvement partners visiting all of our local authority maintained schools on a regular basis, we're able to identify very, very quickly where schools are doing particularly well, and we utilise those strengths and we share those strengths across other schools and have cross-school working. But it also enables us to identify where maybe a good or outstanding school may be looking as if it's going to drop a little bit, or there's a risk that they might not be quite performing at the right level in a particular area. So what we do, for example, to address those is that we will challenge and support them with our school improvement partners. We will also initiate the support of our own LA associate head teacher if we feel that it's a leadership issue and we can quickly fix that. We also broker in executive head teachers that can work both in their own school and in other schools, and we make sure that that's high quality. As I said, we use our own school improvement partners. We also utilise national leaders of governance, and they sometimes go into our schools and support chairs of governors and enable governing boards to become stronger in their roles in challenging and supporting the head teacher and leadership team. We've also worked with the National Governance Association, and often we will request that schools undertake governance reviews using the governance review from this particular service, and we often support that process as well. And in our LA Maintain schools, we have a presence on recruitment panels when schools are losing a head teacher and then recruiting for a new one. And also we work with our partners in the diocese to facilitate improvement in our schools. So there's very much a team around the school, and we look to working with our partners across the north for those purposes. Thank you. So as I was saying earlier, we've put together a North Schools Effectiveness Strategy. And within that strategy, we talk to our schools about, or we're going to share with our schools what the purpose of that is. But from an inside the organisation purpose, what we want to do is we want to get the departments within our organisation working more closely together, particularly those departments that work in education. So for example, our colleagues who are in the SEND teams, our colleagues in virtual school, our colleagues who work with exclusions and work with particularly our schools on trying to reduce the number of exclusions. And it's really important that we work together in partnership so that we can support our schools to become better in all aspects of education, and for all pupils and all groups of pupils to be able to get the best outcomes in our school. So certainly we're looking at some work inside the organisation to bring together those partners in education internally as well as externally. So for outside the organisation, we certainly want to provide the following things, and the ways in which we're going to look at that I'll show you in the diagrams that we come to at the end of the presentation. But what we want to be doing in the future is working effectively in partnership with schools. We want to improve our communication with schools and be open and transparent about what we want to do and how we want to work together with our schools. We want to work in co-production with our schools so that actually we're talking with our schools about the key priorities that we need to look at in terms of outcomes for pupils academically, but we also want to be working in partnership with our schools regarding local issues and also how we can support the child and their families. We want to be open and transparent, we want to be equitable and fair, and we want to develop localised solutions. Thank you. So this is how the strategy will look outside the organisation, and this is what we are hoping to develop during the course of this academic year, or go some way to organising this. So there are 3 tiers to the strategy that we would like to develop, and there will be a strategic partnership level, and on the strategic partnership level we would be wanting to work with key players. So for example, we would want to have on a representative board, for example, people from our teaching school hub. We would want to look at having on that board partners from the diocese, head teachers or CEOs of trusts that are based in special education, independent schools, etc., so that we have got a group of people that we can work with, communicate with, share priorities with, and then work in a solution focused way to ensure the best education for all of our pupils across Northamptonshire. Once we've established our strategic group, we would be looking then to work at the next tier down, which would be working in school level clusters. And in those clusters, we would want to be a part of those clusters, because what we already have across some of the north areas of the county are really strong groups of head teachers and schools working together. And that's academies and LA Maintain schools working together within clusters as well as with their own multi-academy trusts. So what we want to do is locate where those areas are working, where those heads and schools are working well. We want to be part of those areas, and we want to be able to facilitate development in those areas. We want to be able to look at the priorities that we're working on, but also talk to the schools themselves about their local issues, the pressures on them in schools, and start working on a solution-focused way of eradicating those barriers and moving forward together for the sake of the children in that locality. And then finally, we've got the individual school layer for outside the organisation. And that's where our school improvement partners and associate head teacher will continue to work with schools on a bespoke and individual layer, making sure that they are progressing towards their next Ofsted inspection and getting the best outcomes for their pupils. And that's where we can give them that individual support and challenge as we move forward. And then those layers will all filter through together and have the golden thread of partnership working through. So that's our strategy at the moment, and we plan to roll that strategy out to our CEOs in multi-academy trusts, to secondary school head teachers, primary schools and our LA maintained nursery schools, so that we can share that strategy with them. We can talk about where our statutory duties lie, but also about how we can evolve more effective partnerships and effective communication and working together for the children across the north of our county. And then finally, inside the organisation. So whilst we're working outside of the organisation to facilitate those effective partnerships, inside the organisation, we're going to be working at a strategic level across our services with service managers across learning skills and education, pulling data together, pulling together ourselves and looking at where the strengths lie in our schools across the county, where we know that there are particular areas for improvement, and working together in a solution-focused manner to do what is best for those schools and to support those schools in the best ways that we can, and also to listen to the feedback coming from those schools so that we can actually, again, as I said before, work in a solution-focused way. That will involve something called the single conversation, and that's where we will be looking together at the data that we can see before us across all of our education departments. And then that will also facilitate individual responses where we can start putting in that early help and intervention, so that over time we begin to have strategies that will hopefully eradicate a problem or an issue before it gets too big. So that's kind of the bigger picture of where we are with school effectiveness in the north. And that's the end of the presentation for this evening. Thank you.
That's superb. Thank you very much for that. And at the beginning, you acknowledged, you know, the teachers and the head teachers, and I'd like to put that on record as well. To acknowledge that, you know, everybody that was worked in schools, whether it be head teachers, teachers assistants, dinner ladies, cleaners, you know, everybody that has worked for the past 2 years within schools that have done an absolutely amazing job, and are still doing an amazing job to get us through, you know, the worst 2 years of, well, certainly my lifetime, and I'm sure many of yours too. So if that could just be recorded as well, Jenny, that would be great. Thank you. Wendy.
And thank you for that. That was interesting. I've got a few questions. Going back to the ratings from the academy secondaries, obviously they compare well to the national level, but still obviously too many require improvement. I just wanted to know, are the different academy trusts, do they have similar Ofsted ratings across their schools, or is that, are the Ofsted ratings across all schools? It's not really it's not really dependent on what academy trust the schools are in.
So in most academy trusts, the majority of the schools do have a similar Ofsted grading. However, the academies do and this is the nature of their role really, is they do pick up schools, for example. So if a school becomes inadequate, then they will automatically then be academised. So there might be situations where schools are academy trusts are picking up schools that might be inadequate because unfortunately that's happened, and then they've been forcibly academised. Or they might have schools in the trust that are of a lower category, and what they will be doing is looking at that, looking at the resources they've got, and then looking to work together to improve that particular school so that it does come up to either good or outstanding within the trust.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And then can we have regular updates at the EAP on the improvements across the stuck schools? And I'd be particularly interested in those 3 that have been required improvement for an appallingly long time. I understand there's a lot of work going on now, but really they should not have been required improvement for the number of years they have. And then thirdly, I just wondered, do we have enough staff in the schools improvement team, or are we fully, are those posts fully occupied?
So at the moment, we have the largest number of school improvement partners that we've had in terms of the ability to have such a range of skill sets. So we've got up to 4 school improvement partners, and then we have 2 who are early years. So for us at this moment in time, that's really helped us to be able to target our school improvement partners in schools. With the associate head teacher as well, we've been able to make give great time and capacity to schools around their leadership, because we often find that in schools that have these challenges, it's often an area of leadership and management that we need to work on, and that is what has made the most powerful impact at this moment in time. But I also think with the strategy that we are moving forward with, and the way that we want to work in partnership more widely with our key players in the North, I think there are other ways in which we can utilise support and high quality support for all of our schools, both academies and LA maintained, by working together. And that through this strategy is how we want to work moving forward, so that we know exactly where our school support, as well as us working with schools as well.
Thank you very much for that. And Wendy, to answer your first question, yes, absolutely. What I can ask is that it's put on the forward list of items, and that we get some updates on this to move forward with that. Philip.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a few questions as well, Joe. Thanks very much for your presentation. I thought it was really very clear. You illuminated those slides. I had looked through the slides beforehand as they were in the pack, but you gave so much more information. I'd like to add my congratulations to what the Chairman said. Of course, we've got over 3/4 of our schools are good or outstanding. I appreciate we're particularly focusing on those that require improvement, but I think we have to say well done as well to those schools that have just got on with it and are doing a good job for our children. That's obviously a marvellous situation. Now, my specific questions. First, do you find anything in common in terms of the schools that require improvement? Do they share any common features that are less shared by the other 75% of schools?
Yes, I think I've alluded to that earlier on as well. Very often it is based around the quality of leadership and management in the school. And that is an area that will often need strengthening and support. And that's why we decided to bring in the role of the associate head teacher, because they are able then to focus purely on that aspect of the school. And we have seen that that has made a tremendous impact to date anyway, certainly in those schools that I gave you the stats on earlier. So yes, certainly they are. And then when you look at those things, we then work with governance as well. So sometimes the governing boards in those schools need support to challenge the head teacher and leadership team more rigorously. and hold them to account in different ways, and maybe come into the school and monitor more. So there are definitely some things which are common throughout the school, and actually we're looking at that and looking at ways in which we can work with schools together to address some of those issues, as well as working in a bespoke way.
So, so you're talking about leadership, management, governance, and as a common feature. I was wondering about demographics or location. Is that not a common feature for schools that require improvement?
Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not the case. So there are a balance of the two things, but in the main, it's around the leadership and management. Okay,
and I believe I might be slightly misquoting, but Sir Keith Joseph, when he was Minister for Education, said the nearest thing to a magic bullet or a magic wand in a school is a good head teacher. And I absolutely agree. I think it very much comes from that. And I noted that your example of support for schools where a head teacher might be on long-term sick, and I was wondering. So my next question is that happening a lot? Are you finding that when you go into schools that head teachers are suddenly going off on sick leave?
I'm pleased to say that's not a very common issue. It's very rare, but now we have a strategy in the team that if that does happen, we can offer to pop somebody into that school for a short period of time just to keep everything going, or indeed to coach a deputy head teacher who may then step into the role of an interim or acting head teacher. So we've got that capacity to keep that strength going in the school. Thank you.
With your forbearance, Chair, I've just got a couple more questions. The schools that Councillor Brackenbury has already mentioned, the ones that have been requiring improvement for a decade or more, how many generations of children have passed through those schools? I'm guessing that what happened probably under the previous administration is that we sent in team after team of well-meaning, qualified individuals, and it didn't make any difference. Is that a fair summary?
I think there's a range of things to look at there, and some of those things you alluded to earlier in terms of where the school is based. So there are external challenges in terms of the demographics. I think we also need to be aware as well that the Ofsted framework has changed several times during that period. And whilst there was work going on in the school to improve that setting at the time, it has been increasingly harder over the years to achieve a strong good in a school. So there's some changes as they've gone along before. But actually we have had teams of experts in the school moving forward, but there have also been changes of leadership during that time as well. So there are a number of different factors.
Yeah, and just to finish up, I'll be a little mischievous because I don't feel that I have great expertise here, but I have noted in schools where I've worked that where we've been most effective, and I've just known as the school leader that we've been effective, I didn't need that validated, that has been when we've had least people coming in, scrutinising us, telling and making most importantly, making the staff feel scrutinised, making them have to hand in planning, hand in this, hand in that. And that's the one thing I fear about your approach, is whether in fact there's a risk that you will prevent improvement by putting people under pressure, rather than just saying to the teachers, you know what, you're a qualified teacher, just get on and teach.
That's a really interesting point you raise, and I believe that the way we're working with our current team is very, very different to that. We do give support, we do rigorously challenge, and I've been in several schools with my officers as they've been working, and believe me, they do challenge, but they do it in a way that is very supportive, and they will say where they've got concerns, and they will challenge a head teacher or a leader in a school if they believe that the responses that they're giving are not either well qualified or well evidenced, and that point will be made. But we very much go about our work in a way that will enable, and we're not about walking into schools and kind of making them feel inadequate in terms of the work that they're doing. And I'm trying to think of an example to give you on that front, but it's where we're putting our team around the schools. So we're not actually doing unto. We work with our schools so that actually the change comes from within. We coach and we mentor to enable that to happen. And at all times, we are doing that in a professional manner so that people feel empowered rather than feeling that it's too much. And we do regularly seek feedback from the schools that we're working with to ensure that actually everybody is still feeling, that their well-being is considered in that process as well.
Thank you. I think it would be lovely if maybe next time you come, and I do hope that you'll be attending this again to give us an update. It'd be lovely if you could share some of the feedback and some of the stats from that feedback, especially from the staff working at the chalk face. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Leanne.
Good evening, thank you. I liked some of your questions there, Philip. Actually, you picked up some of mine. When I first went through the report and we were looking at the difference between the national and the national and the local and the academy and the maintained, I thought it was quite interesting that the information kind of gives the suggestion that actually maintained schools are doing better nationally than the academies are. But then after throwing the idea around with some school friends, they actually said, well, actually, Leanne, if you were going to get rid of some schools, you'd probably go for those that are failing and ask academies to try and improve them. For somebody who's not a massive fan of the academy system, because people before profits, that rung music to my ears. But I understand that actually that doesn't make any difference. So that's simply a comment. Going forward, I was really shocked on the slide that said that there was the 3 schools in requiring an improvement for so long. That rung massive alarm bells, because I'm thinking year after year they're coming back and getting the same answer and nothing's changing. And I understand what you're saying about putting in support, but I then question, was that support good enough if nothing was changing? So, I mean, can you take me through why, or can you take us through, sorry, collectively, can you take us through why, for 14 years a school required improvement?
Again, some of this happened before my time in terms of the team and being heading this team. It is a very long time for a school to be in that particular category, and I do agree with you there. And there have been several teams who've been in the school and worked with them, worked alongside the leadership teams, and had various improvement targets in place. And eventually, I think what has changed that now and made that progress now is that there has been a change of leadership over time, and actually that in itself, with the support from our local authority and our current teams, has made the difference. But I appreciate that we have had teams going in there before and working with them in the past, and again, that hasn't changed as quickly as we would have liked.
Okay, so in terms of the schools that have been in require improvement for that long, I presume that these 3 were, an example that's unusual. Did we at any point remove children from those schools or stop sending any students to those schools?
No, not at that time, as far as I'm aware.
Okay, which is really interesting. Okay, so last one, I believe. In terms of the clusters you're talking about, is that simply for schools that require improvement, so a cluster of schools that require improvement, or do you go on a locality? So, for example, Corby would have a cluster and Kettering would have a cluster.
It's varied over the years, particularly since academies have come into play. So some schools work in what they call locality clusters, and that could be a mixture of LA maintained schools and academies within that cluster. And actually that's quite good when that happens, because you've still got schools that are academies engaging together with their local community. Sometimes you've got schools that are working together successfully in their mats, and they remain in those mats and work together within those mats. And that's, again, a successful group of schools.
What's a mat? Sorry to jump in. What's a mat?
Trust.
Roger, thank you.
So they might be working together there. So we have lots of different schools working in different ways together. And what we want to try and do through the strategy that we're setting up now is to find out where those clusters are, how big those clusters are, and how we can work together with them as they work on their priorities and their local priorities. Does that answer?
Okay, and I think it does. Yeah, it does. Thank you. In terms of the schools forum, how do you link in with that? Is the schools forum now a north and a west one? Yeah, I'm seeing a nod from Kathy. Thank you. So there's a north and a west schools forum. How does that work link into the work you do? Do you work closely with the schools forum?
So for me, in my role, that is something that I'm just about to embark on, and I will be expected to report to Schools Forum on the impact of the work that we're doing, because obviously we will be utilising funds in order to deliver that support. So that's what I will be doing in future Schools Forum meetings.
Okay, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Leanne. Kathy.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards, and thank you, everybody. There were some really good questions there, and a really big thank you to Joe, because I think you really did take us through some difficult and challenging information, and you did it in a way that we all understood, and we all got something from. So thank you for that, Joe. I just wanted to probably, which might issue some more questions, just go through some of the comments that people have made and questions. Really, I think it's fair to say that historically, Joe's service, Joe's team was incredibly small. Joe at the beginning said there has been an increase. And I think if we think about systems leadership, and we are now council members and a senior leadership now, I think the approach and the opportunities the North have had in terms of supporting schools and making inquiries and holding to account schools that are failing, I think we're in a position, and I know that's something that both that North have been thinking about and trying to put forward, and hence that we're sitting here talking about the Education Advisory Panel. I would say historically that is not what's happened. I would say that, along with children's social care, it was about how did the council, NCC, support and manage and assist across that system. I think it's also fair to say, and what we've discovered as we've gone forward, is that the leadership within the schools have very much worked in silos. And so I remember having a conversation with a chief exec of a multi-academy trust who sits there with schools that are outstanding and good. And I asked him why he was not interested in the primary school that was about 12 miles away from him. And he said, but they're inadequate. Why would we want them? And so again, we've begun to do some work with the system, with the leaders, to say, actually, how do we have a responsibility for education for all children across the whole piece, and that we don't just work in silos looking after ourselves in those areas. I think what we also have to bear in mind is, and I guess I welcome that Councillor Buckingham in terms of thinking about maintained schools and how you would prefer maintained schools, and you have some thinking about academies. But the direction of travel by the DfE is that it all becomes multi-academy trusts, and that poses us with a real challenge, but an opportunity maybe, because how do we, as leaders, and also in terms of our workforce, like Joe's team, support academies and hold them accountable, and hold the regional schools commissioner accountable for the performance of the schools that they are actually running accountable for. And where's our position as a service to enable that? Because as we go forward, and as you can see, we only have one secondary which is maintained in the North. So it's a situation which is really challenging. It's a situation that we have to kind of look at, and we have to find our place, but we also have a responsibility to hold the regional schools commissioner accountable for their actions, but also in terms of working towards how the DfE want us to work in that environment. I think there is a bit, Councillor Erwin, sorry, you picked up the bit about geography and deprivation and areas where it might be harder to improve schools, and I think you're probably right. And I think that journey for schools is sometimes harder. And if you're part of a multi-academy trust, that sometimes will assist. But equally, the Ofsted inspection is such that, you know, for some children, getting up in the morning, putting the uniform on, and actually getting to school is a real achievement in some areas, and so it is a bit challenging. But I think we need to recognise that, but we also should expect that the education in those areas is exactly the same as anywhere else. It should be good or outstanding, and we need to help schools do that. I think you know, I think with schools that requires improvement, that in the main, we wouldn't remove children from schools that requires improvement, because often that is about performance in terms of maths and English. But you will all know that we have recently been looking at how we manage a school where the inadequate rating was because of safeguarding issues. And so that's a very, very different matter and a very different responsibility. So, and you know, you raised that, Councillor Buckingham, and I welcome that. And if you want a conversation offline, I'm absolutely happy to do that. You know, we need to have an open conversation, and I'm happy to do that. But I just want us to be clear that we would not remove children from a school which is about maths and English and whatever, because we can put leaders in, we can put teachers in to manage that. But where we have safeguarding issues, we would definitely be thinking about our approach, you know. But if you want to do that, Councillor Buckingham, I'm happy to do that. Yeah. So that was all I was going to say. I don't know if anybody has any other questions for myself on that.
Superb, thank you, Kathy. I've got nobody with their hands raised, so thank you. And Joe, yeah, absolutely, thank you. That really was a thorough presentation, which, you know, has sparked a lot of questions. And I'm sure actually, as the evening goes on and we start thinking about things, we'll bring more questions to light. And if it does, you know, just email us, and then we can come back and get you those answers. But absolutely, we look forward to you welcoming you to a future board with the improvements, you know, and your entire team as well, because, you know, it is a difficult job. So thank you from all of us.
Thank you.
Okay, so we moved on to item 5, which is the forward plan of executive items. Francesca, are you doing this one?
I can do. Would you like me to share it on the screen?
Yes, please.
Sorry, I think my internet's being a bit slow.
Yeah, mine keeps coming up unstable, actually.
Bear with me. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so the forward plan of executive items, we've passed September. You'll note that there was one under Children's Services, which was the amalgamation of Tennyson Road and Alfred Street schools. These were scheduled for the executive meeting on the 28th of October. This date has now been moved to the 18th of November. Due to this item will now be considered at the advisory panel on the 27th of October. So that will be at your next one. I don't believe there is anything on the executive forward plan for November or December under Children's Services at the moment.
Superb. Thank you, Francesca, for that. And discussing that at the next EAP. Item 6 is the forward list of items for education, skills and employment. Francesca, it's you again.
Yes, so we've got the forward list of items. There's nothing currently scheduled for the meeting in December. For the next one on the 27th of October, you've got items on virtual schools, SEND, the Youth Justice Plan, and as we've just mentioned, the proposed amalgamation of Tennyson Road Infant and Alfred Street Junior Schools. For the meeting of the 24th of November, there's a briefing on high needs funding, and that is the extent of your panel work programme at the moment.
Thank you, Francesca. Kathy.
I was just wondering whether myself, yourself, Councillor Edwards and Anne-Marie look at that, because that seems quite a heavy agenda on the 27th of October, and whether there are things that can actually be moved for the 24th of November. Yeah,
absolutely. I think there's four quite meaty reports on there, actually, so we could move one or two of those over. Okay, and so members, is there anything else that anybody would like to see on the future? Is there future reports? I think we've lost the members, actually, haven't we? I think Councillor Buckingham's gone. So yeah, Wendy, Philip, anything else that you'd like to see for future meetings?
Not offhand, but I could have a think and get back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it would be good to have an update on the requiring improvement schools to know how the strategy is going. Maybe not straight away, but perhaps at the beginning of next term, as in spring term.
Yeah, that's fine. So maybe about February time.
I think that'd be a good point. Yeah.
Perfect. Yes. If you've got other suggestions that you want, yeah, that am I losing you?
Yes.
You're dropping in and out.
Yeah, any other suggestions, just drop me a line and we can go through them and then pop them on for future reference. So so that closes tonight's meeting. So thank you very much for coming along. It has been a really good meeting tonight, so I'm really pleased with that, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.